I want people to dream small. And the important word there is really dream. Like, I want you to find what's going to fulfill you and bring you joy and give you purpose in your life. It doesn't have to be some huge swing. It can be a small thing. Just get going and chase your dreams, and big things can happen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 16 of Leading with Relevance. And we have got a great guest on today. I like to say what we shoot for is people busting through the status quo, impacting both companies and community. So our goal is to interview and highlight personal and professional journeys and understand what the leader's why is, as Simon Sinek talks about. And for the listeners, we hope that you'll have some practical insights that you can apply to your pathway of leadership. I'm Tito Mantella, and loving the opportunity to talk to and learn from every time I do learn from great leaders. Our podcast launched the third Monday of every month. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing Jeff Hilimire. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and there's a lot to tell. So he's the co-founder and partner of Purpose Group, a purpose-driven holding company. He's the co-founder of 48 and 48, a company that builds websites for nonprofits. The founder of Ripples Media, a nonfiction publisher, co-founder and executive board chair at Dragon Army, and I remember that from my days running the Technology Association of Georgia. And Dragon Army's also a purpose-driven digital engagement company based in Atlanta. Other companies, if that's not enough, he's founded include the A Pledge, Ripples of Hope, Match Atlanta, and Spun Logic. He's a board member of Good Nation, Youth Themed Business, the Carter Center, Brand Savo, and the Metropolitan Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. He's been featured in Atlanta Business Chronicles 40 Under 40, and he hosts the Planting Seed podcast. So we have two podcasters talking today.
And yeah. Thanks for having me, Tino. I so appreciate it.
And after earning a bachelor's degree in computer science, University of Carolina at Charlotte, Jeff, you've gone and start quite a few companies. So what I want to ask you first is kind of what's inspired you to take the leap into entrepreneurship? You've been doing it for a long time now.
Yeah, you know what? There was no blueprint when I went to college. I was a tennis player, and that's really all I thought about back then. And the internet was new. And so I was a computer science major, and my roommate and I, Raj Chowdhury, began building websites in the dorm room. And it was in the dorm room at UNC Charlotte that we started our first company, a website design company. So there wasn't really a plan, but I come from a long line of, I would say, entrepreneurs in my family. My dad has and still has a vending company here in Atlanta. So I used to run routes with him, and my uncles have businesses, my aunts. So it was like I was around entrepreneurship. And so the idea wasn't scary to me, but I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. I never thought that far ahead. But ever since the senior year at UNC Charlotte, I've been trying to build companies.
It's funny how that happened. So a lot of us go to school. We're not sure exactly what we're going to do, but then we find our way. You've certainly done that. So another key piece to, I think, your life goals and what you've achieved is always a tie into purpose. So how has purpose become such an integral part of your business strategies and everything you've done?
Yeah. When I built my first company, that one we started in the dorm room, to about 70 employees over 10 years, and then we sold it to private equity. And then I stayed at the private equity fund, and that company had about 350 employees, stayed there for 5 years. Then we sold that. And that was 15 years then into my, career. Right. And sold two businesses, been on all the lists. You mentioned 40 Under 40, we were best places to work. We sort of ratcheted up all the awards you could. And yet I was very unfulfilled, and I didn't really know why. I felt like, I had followed society's formula for success, and yet I felt empty. And around that time, I went through Leadership Atlanta, and it profoundly changed my life. It helped me see it's not meant. I would say this is maybe one of the reasons they run their program, but it's not really why they run it. But for me, It opened my eyes to the massive amount of privilege I have as a human being. And thinking back on my career and all the things I had done, I thought, gosh, that was hard. And, I racked up credit card debt and everything. But at the same time, I was never taken less seriously because of who I was. And I was never not welcomed into a room because of who I was. And so I just sort of came out of Leadership Atlanta and decided to figure out why am I on this planet and what should I be striving toward. Ultimately landed on, you mentioned Simon Sinek. I read his book. I talked to experts. Ultimately landed on a personal purpose of having an outsized positive impact on the world. And so for the last 12 years, everything I've done, I've tried to orient toward having an outsized positive impact. That started with building purpose driven companies. Well, I had to figure out what that meant. And then I sort of fell in love with that, started writing books about it, started nonprofits. So everything in my life started to change, around age 35. And ever since then, I've been pretty laser focused on purpose.
Sounds like that's really been fulfilling for you too. A lot of people go through life and they're not exactly sure what their mission is. So it didn't dawn on you over one day. It doesn't sound like it's Leadership Atlanta. I hear a lot of good things about it, but it's not necessarily maybe intended to be life changing. So that's interesting.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And I was in that class. There's about 80 people in each class, and I know everyone got something different out of it, but it was so impactful for me. And it was Ken Bernhardt, one of my mentors and
Yeah.
favorite human beings. That I sat down with him, and I'm like, Ken, we're about to sell the second company, and I don't know. And he goes, you got to try Leadership Atlanta. And I don't know if he knew exactly what it would do for me, but he knew it would be impactful, and everything's been different since.
So I want to go all the way back. You did mention your father and a lot of family members, but I always like to ask the question in the early part of your life, snapshot of, two or three people maybe that influenced you or what shaped you to, because you probably, even though you decided later on to be purpose driven, I'm guessing that somewhere along the line you had some roots in that in your early stage of life too.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Yeah, I think there's a couple of different things that, as I look back, I was impacted by. Certainly, my mom is like incredibly positive and just, the brightest person you're going to meet. And so I think I've always had a positive, mentality. And I think that helps when you're an entrepreneur. Um, my dad taught me to follow through. And it is I'm sure you see this too, especially today, like the ability to follow through on what you say you're going to do.
Yeah,
It's rare today.
it
It's
is.
it's rare. So and then my high school, not my high school, college tennis coach, but my like tennis coach during my high school years at the tennis camp I went to, he made us learn how to work hard. So I think about like everything I've, been able to accomplish, it was really through hard work and just diligence and following through. I've never had like the great big idea that took me somewhere. It was always just like one foot in front of the other, learn from your mistakes. So I think I got a lot of that from my tennis coach, that part.
Yeah, I think a lot of people pick up things from music or art or sports. I certainly have a background in that as well, where you have life lessons because sometimes you have to learn them the hard way. You don't always win at that either, right? So you learn to keep going. So I think let's jump into the purpose-driven piece because you talked about understanding what that means. So maybe for the listening group, talk about like purpose-driven, what it means to you, and how you've been able to reflect that in your companies.
Yeah, it took me a while, when I first found my personal purpose, and then I said, okay, if I'm going to build for-profit companies, they need to stand for something. They need to have a deeper purpose. They need to be positive to the community, to the world, to the team working at that company. I honestly, at the beginning, was fairly cynical about the ability to put true purpose into a company. It just like, I felt like, people don't want that. People don't understand that. So I used Dragon Army, which was the next company I started once I sold the second one. And it was like a testing ground for me to figure out how can you authentically put purpose or unearth purpose within a company. And so over years of working on Dragon Army doing that, I started to have friends who would ask, what's working over there? Why's your culture like that? It seems pretty great. So I started writing more blogs about it. Ultimately, now I've written 6 books over the last 7 years on my philosophy on how to build a purpose-driven company. And it's it's simple at the same time as it's fairly complex, but as I'm sure you would agree, it's all in the operationalizing of it. So
Yeah.
you can go through the process of saying, okay, we've all agreed this is why we exist. And you can go through the process of saying, these are the values that we hold true. But if you don't seriously focus on the operationalizing of that, how do you bring that into the company every day? How do you reinforce it every day? How do you continuously motivate your team toward it? It's going to end up being just something that's on the wall or in the company handbook. So to me, again, going back to like follow through, work ethic, that's what purpose, if you really want purpose to be embedded in your company, you've got to do the hard work and keep working at it every day.
So when I ran the YMCA's in Chicago, we early on said we have to change the people or change the people, and I guess fortunately or unfortunately, in that case, we changed a lot of people over that time. So my question to you is, you hire people, if you found that it's best to really spend time interviewing and hiring people that have sort of the same philosophy, values, purpose driven, or can you change that and create a culture within a company that maybe started out, profit motive, but not necessarily they're coming in for a particular job. They're not necessarily wanting to change the world or even, have a purpose beyond maybe a microcosm of what you were trying to do.
Right. Well, first of all, I was born in Joliet, so I don't know if,
Oh,
we knew we had Chicago connections.
yeah,
Yeah. So I come from Chicago. And what's interesting about change the people or change the people, I wrote a blog post back in the day, change the place you work or change the place you work. So I sort
yeah,
of looked at it from the other angle as well. So I think you can do it either way. I think you can build it from the ground up and have it be the centerpiece of this new business you're building, or you can work with an existing company to implement it. What I do now, my day job now, is running a holding company, which you mentioned at the beginning, called
yeah,
Purpose Group. And what we do is we look to acquire, mid-sized businesses that don't necessarily have purpose, but have been successful, have, been around for decades. They're tried and true. The business is not going anywhere. And what we do is we acquire those companies from retiring owners who don't really have a succession plan. And the only real change we want to make is to put the purpose playbook, as we call it, into that business. And so we've had a lot of success with the first business we bought in 2023 out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. And it really takes a lot of buy-in from everybody. So you got to
yeah,
bring the whole company together, work with everyone. But I've seen it work both ways. I think you can obviously launch a company with it, but you can also shift a company. It just takes diligence and time.
yeah. I guess it's maybe if there's one that's easier than the other, if you're starting something and building it from scratch versus inheriting a company that has 500 people, different tactics, right? Different science in terms of how do you
100%.
really convert versus pick people that are sort of aligned with what you're thinking is to begin with. I kind of had that experience at Tag where there's only a couple of us, so it's pretty easy to at least make an attempt to build a good culture there. So, financial impact, I think finance is always important, but how do you balance that with social impact? And are there moments when these priorities conflict?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. It's so interesting. When I started Purpose Group, again, we exist to acquire companies and help them build more purpose into their business. Um, when we were launching, I got the comment quite consistently, "Oh, so you're kind of happy to have profit, but you don't really expect it, but you're going to feel good about what you're doing." And I was like, "That's crazy to me." Like the idea that you would help people at a company believe in what the business does, work together as a team, motivate them to grow the business and profit sharing is a part of what we do. Like, how does that not grow profit? Like, but it feels like people think it's a choice. It's one or
Yeah,
the other. So that's the first thing is like I'm a big believer business should be a force for good. And the data's there. Businesses that are purpose driven, that are
right.
conscious, they outperform their peers. So that's the first thing. But to your true question, absolutely, there's times I've found when like, you have to make tough decisions. I always tell my teams like, look, you can't really be purpose driven in the way that you want if there's complete chaos from a financial perspective. If
Yeah.
you're constantly putting out fires and you're having to figure out, are we going to have to reduce staff next month? It is hard to stay true to who you are. So it all starts with a bedrock of a healthy, profitable business. And
Yeah.
then you got to stick to your guns. I mean, there were times at Dragon Army where we would have the opportunity to work with a brand that we just couldn't get on alignment with. And it would have been good money and it would have certainly helped us financially at that moment. But long term, it would have been the wrong type of client for us. So I think you have to have ownership, leadership that believes in the long term business. If you have, if you're a public company, super hard to do that. If you're
Yeah.
privately owned and you have shareholders that believe in what you're doing, it's a lot easier. So there is give and take, but I think it can work out pretty nicely if you stick to your guns and have a long term perspective.
I love that. So one of your tech talks, TED Talks, excuse me, you talked about the challenges, the idea of dreaming big. Can you share a story in your life when dreaming small yielded outsized impact?
Yeah. So going back to when I found my purpose and I started Dragon Army, after a year or two of building Dragon Army and working hard to figure out how does purpose fit into a business like this, I thought, okay, I need to do something else outside of Dragon Army if I want to have that outsized positive impact. And every idea I would come up with was big. And I would always say, well, I can't start that now. But I need to do something big because it's got to have a big impact. And I've
Yeah.
built these big companies. And it wasn't until a happy accident happened that was small that led to something which I think is maybe the best thing that I've done in my career so far. So I joined the board of a small nonprofit, and they at our board meeting they said we've got to figure out a way to get our website redesigned in the next 3 or 4 days. There was a big fundraiser coming up. So I went back to my team and I was like, "Hey guys, I think we ought to try this." And they looked at me and said, "Okay, we get that you're passionate about this, Jeff, but we are extremely busy and we're not going to get paid for this. And oh, by the way, how can you build a website in 3 or 4 days? That seems impossible." But as I say, voluntold them that we'd be doing the
Right.
project, and we did it. And what was amazing was my team felt so fulfilled from that. It was a small website, but they really felt a lot of pride in their work. And that's when I started to think, I wonder if I could do more of this. And I thought, well, I could have my team do it every quarter or something, but that might drain them. And also, I don't know that that's going to have the impact I want. So I said, well, I could recruit other teams, which led me to, the fairly insane idea of putting on an event in Atlanta at Pond City Market in October of 2015 to bring together several hundred people forming 48 teams with the idea of building 48 nonprofit websites in a 48-hour period. So that kernel of we built a small one for a nonprofit at my company led me to I wonder if I could do this with a bunch of people. And why not? Because they could all sit at different places and build their own website. And that was successful. So at the end of that, we had built 48 websites somehow. And it was the volunteers that came to me and said, we want more. Like, can we sign up for next year? And I just remember thinking, man, I never thought we'd do this again. It was a lot of work on my side and my team side. But then the next year we did New York and Atlanta. And then the year after that, 4 cities, and then 6 cities. And ultimately we did London twice. And now we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And volunteers around the world have built 1,300
Wow.
nonprofit websites since we started 48 and 48. But again, it started with a very small thing, which
Yeah.
led to a bigger idea. So yeah, the point of my TED talk was like, I want people to dream small. And the
Yeah.
important word there is really dream. Like I want you to find what's going to fulfill you and bring you joy and give you purpose in your life. It doesn't have to be some huge swing. It can be a small thing. If it's pets and you want to help pets, volunteer for 2 hours at the Humane Society. That's enough. Just get started
Right.
instead of thinking, oh, I got to have a whole weekend designate. Just get going and chase your dreams. And big things can happen, but they don't have to.
In some of your companies, have you done big money raise? I've got this is kind of a two-part question because, I'm thinking you and I have been involved with like Venture Atlanta and all the stuff that goes on in Atlanta, which is great stuff. But when you're an entrepreneur, I think some people feel pretty pressured to pursue these big ideas and massive world-changing ideas, and the funders may be asking for that as well. So I know that's a broad question, but maybe you can sort out some answers for that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, when I started Dragon Army, Dragon Army is a digital agency today. We build websites and mobile apps and sometimes games for customers, for brands. When I started Dragon Army, it was a mobile gaming company. And the idea was to build games. And we did raise money. And I felt the pressure to come out swinging. Now, this is an industry I had no experience in. So, yes, I had great investors, but I felt like there was pressure to go big. And honestly, that's one of the biggest mistakes of my career is that we decided to tackle one big game that took us 9 to 12 months to build and launch. And that wasted most of our runway. And so we only had a chance to do a couple small games before I had to pivot the business into an agency because we ran out of funding because I thought we had to go big. So I think if I had started small and we took some swings at some small mobile games, that would have
Yeah.
been a smarter strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So just I think lessons to entrepreneurs about not having again to out of the box do something that's really significant that's going to cost you a lot of money, and then you're going to run out of money, and you're not going to have much to show for it. So, going back to purpose and entrepreneurs and founders. If they want to build purpose into their business, how would they do that? Kind of thinking about it starting. I'm sure you talk to a lot of
Hmm.
entrepreneurs about that.
Yeah, I have. It all starts actually with their purpose. So most people don't have a defined purpose. Again, I didn't until 35 years old. So I would say start there. You need to figure out why you're building this business. How does it fit into your master plan? Otherwise, yes, you're going to chase success as it's defined by the startup world, the investment world. You need to define success. So as long as you have a purpose and you know what you're trying to do, actually figuring out what your business's purpose is easy. It's when you don't know why you're here that it's difficult. So, not to hawk my books, but like that's why I've written these books because I'm trying to help purpose-driven leaders do just what you said. And I don't find that there's a lot of playbooks out there. Again, going back to Simon Sinek's Start with Why, great book on why purpose is important. I think less tangible on, okay, how do I actually do this? And so that's why I've developed the Purpose Playbook because I've had to learn it and I've helped the nonprofits I've started learn it. And so I think whether it's mine or some other formula, you need to find a process and go after it. And then, again, never stop. You can't launch a business, say, hey, this is the purpose of the business. It's authentic, it's true. And then as soon as you're stuck with a tough decision, you're going in the opposite direction. No one's going to believe you then after. So you have to be authentic.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, you could build a great business that would be perceived as a great business by the outside world, but feel very much unfulfilled. So I think
Hmm.
that's part of your message to people. Make sure you're, at the end of the day, if you're kind of looking at your own uh, success, how are you rating that success so you feel good about it and you feel like you've made a contribution. Another area you've been involved with is Ripple's Media, reshaping how purpose-driven authors publish. So, talk a little bit about that and storytelling, why it's important, and how you really make decisions around what books you're going to support.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I wrote my first book, The 5 Day Turnaround, in 2018. And, by this point, I had been an entrepreneur for 20 years. And I said, okay, I got to get a publisher. And I went and tried to get in touch with publishers. Couldn't get anyone to answer my calls or respond to my emails. And then I learned you got to have an agent. So then I went trying to find an agent. Another 6 months passed. Found one agent that was willing to take me on. She took me to all the publishers. That took another 3 to 4 months, and they all turned me down. And you want to know the main reason they turned me down? Because I'm from Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe that? I
Yeah.
was like, what are you talking about? Like, and they're like, too small of a market. I mean, this is New York, right? They
Yeah.
think Atlanta's farm, right?
Yeah.
And I just got really turned off that I had something to say. I wasn't looking for like an advance or anything. I just wanted someone to partner with me to help me get the book out there. So I said, you know what? I'll start my own publishing company and I'll just publish my own books. No problem. Like I can figure that out. So I did. And then I published the second book. And then a few of my friends in Atlanta said, hey, can your publishing company publish my book? So fast forward now, Ripple's Media has been going for 4 years, 4 or 5 years. And I think we've got close to 50 authors. We've got 25 books launched and about 25 in progress. I've got a team of 3 running that company. It turns out there's a real need for not just a publisher who is more open to working with people who have a story to tell, that maybe don't have, they're not famous or something, but also a publisher that builds community. So I found it to be a very isolating experience writing my books. And I've heard the same. And what Ripples does is it brings a community together of people. So to answer your question more directly, the idea of helping leaders that I'm inspired by tell their story and help their business through that, help their efforts through that. It's really inspiring for me. I think it's also really helpful for them to hone their story and figure out what it is that they're trying to say.
Yeah.
I think that's really important for them on their journey. So it's been great. It's a fantastic team that I have, and just helps me again toward that outsized positive impact. Right? I'm happy to have a Joanne Harold get to tell her story to people to inspire them to go out and work toward their purpose or be better leaders or whatever it is that she's trying to do.
Yeah. So you publish the books and then you promote them as well, like the whole 9 yards for publishing company.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. My wife's an author, so we'll
Okay.
have to look into that. Yeah,
I'd love to.
yeah.
Yeah.
So moving on to digital marketing communication, how's that evolved over the years, and advice you give companies trying to find their unique story?
Yeah. One thing I've learned in the digital marketing world is, the channels are going to change constantly. There's always going to be something new. Um, I think, we'll probably end up talking about AI because you can't not talk
Yeah,
about AI today. But like, that's the big shift now is AI. But like even the storytelling needs to be done in 5 and 10 second, swipeable content.
yeah,
So I think you have to be nimble. The channels always change, but what doesn't change, and I think is actually more important now than ever, is a brand having a truly authentic why. People want to be associated with brands that that they feel are important or share their values. And I think the more things like AI come into our world, and the more non-human experiences we have, the humanity of a brand, what it stands for, I think it's so telling that story gets even more important in this evolving world that we're in.
yeah. Well, that's a good segue into AI. Uh, and we're all involved at Relevance, the company that I'm working with now is head of strategy. I mean, we're helping companies think through their AI journey. But how do you see the AI kind of aligning with purpose driven? I know in some ways it's just a tool. You're still the person, but how would you describe it?
Yeah, again, I mean, look, I'm such a purpose homer, so
Yeah,
everything can go back to that. But to me, as we move more and more to a world where automation, agents, robots, whatever you want to call it, are doing a lot of the work, they're interacting with us more and more. Having purpose at the center of a business or a brand or a company is going to be even more important. And if you want to inspire team members who are worried about, what AI is going to do to them and to their careers, inspiring them around the purpose of the company and reorienting them toward that consistently, I just think that becomes more and more important in that kind of world. I also think, you have to be adaptable, which is really a requirement of a purpose-driven company. You have to be adaptable, you have
yeah.
to continuously move. So I think AI for the smart companies is only going to make them smarter.
Yeah, I heard the speaker recently talk about, the emergence of adaptability. There's, IQ and EQ, and now there's AQ. And,
Mm,
it sounds like with AI and, I'm certainly a believer in that, everything else that's coming about now to be somewhat nimble if you're a leader or if you're a company to be able to stay with your mission, stay with your purpose, but also be able to shift to understand what's going on.
mhm.
Which
Yep.
is probably a good segue into asking about, and you've talked in some way around your leadership style, but now, putting you have had a number of businesses. How do you, and this is a lot of people that listen to this podcast are emerging leaders or leaders. So how would you describe your style and how it's evolved over the years?
Yeah. I think I've always been fairly good at building up other leaders and then giving them more and more autonomy and trust. I'm not a micromanager, almost to a fault. So I think I've been good at finding people that can take on more and really grow as leaders. Where I've changed the most is I'm so long term now in my thinking. Month to month, quarter to quarter isn't that important to me. Now I can see much more longer vision. So I think that, that I always sort of tell entrepreneurs like always keep the long term in mind. You have to make short term decisions sometimes to stay alive as a business, but don't get stuck in, sacrificing the future for short term results so that you can
Yeah.
feel important or you can impress your shareholders. I think it's more important to stick with the long view.
Yeah. Oh, growing up in the Chicago area, I'm referring to you. I grew up in upstate New York, but growing up in the Chicago area, Joliet. Uh, but I think all of your businesses have been in Atlanta. So how's the Atlanta market been for building a business?
Oh, it's been great. And we moved here when I was a kid, so
Okay.
I remember Chicago mostly from going once or twice a year in my mom's station wagon and driving the 12 hours from Atlanta and visiting family.
Uh,
Um, Atlanta's been fantastic, and it's only getting better, I think. I think it's a great community. It's like the biggest small town, I like to say. People root for you, people want you to be successful. So I find it to be great for building companies like I've built, marketing agencies. Oh my gosh, the brands here are fantastic. So you've got some of the biggest in the world, you've got some of the best. Yeah, I think the Atlanta market is very supportive. Where we probably still need to do work is on the investment side. We've got a growing VC community, but they're very focused on like the one area that they have
right.
experience in, which is how VCs should work. But the more we have, the more we're going to be able to grow from that perspective. But I like we're going to build on our own. It may take like the MailChimps, right?
Yeah.
MailChimp took no money and sold for $12 billion, 30 years later or whatever. But like, what's wrong with that? I love that. So
Yeah.
I think there's great companies doing that and that we have that rigor, but the culture here, the atmosphere, I think it's just a fantastic town.
Yeah. I agree with you. So I always like to ask a question around failure because a lot of times we learn more from a failure or a misstep
Yep.
versus, nobody has a straight shot to success, but, we've all had our share. Would you like to share something that you faced, a setback or what have you, and turned it around as a learning experience?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that because I think too many entrepreneurs are scared to say that they failed. And I
Yeah.
think like maybe it was growing up in sports and certainly in tennis. I mean, it's called an unforced error. It's like, we make mistakes. And the only way to get better, the only way to truly do anything is to fail. If you've never failed, then you're being driven by a need to never fail. And so you're not taking any risks and you're not trying new things. And if you can think of the journey, you're going to have ups and downs, right? And so I've had so many. I mean, I've learned as a leader, how to work with people, how to bring people along. One of the big things I'll tell you this. So after we sold the first company, and then I was part of the next company, the Engage it was called, and it was private equity owned, and I think we had 100 people in the Atlanta office, and we were pitching Home Depot, and this was going to be the biggest account we had ever won, and it was like a 4 month, 6 month process to pitch this business, and we took a big team and we went and pitched and we found out we won it but we're like, well, let's wait and tell everybody when we get back to the office. And I remember so clearly, we got off the elevator and I don't know that I expected them to like when they heard the news to like hoist us over their shoulders like hip hip
Right.
hooray, but I expected some excitement and we were like, we won, and everyone was like, oh, more work for us.
Yeah, right.
I was like, I mean, it deflated me so much because it was the biggest thing I'd ever won.
Yeah.
And I just remember reflecting on that going, yeah, why would they be excited about this? I had given them no reason to be excited about quote unquote more work. And so that ultimately led me to realize I felt driven to do this, but they didn't. So
Yeah. Good
I
point.
took that into Dragon Army and building purpose into a company and said, yeah, I need to always look back and say, how can I make this team not only be excited about the growth, but be rewarded for the growth? So that was I don't know if that was a mistake, but it had been a mistake in my leadership up until that
Yeah,
point.
you thought everybody was going to be happy, and it's like, no, this is more work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
literally just more work for us.
that's that's uh that's a really good point and very common, I think. So
Mhm.
we want everybody to be excited, and it's like what do they say? What's in it for them, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you talked about your books. I want to make sure people know that you have six of them out there. What's the thing you like most or enjoy most about the books, or is there a particular one people should get started if they wanted to
Mm,
jump in?
that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like picking between your
Yeah.
children. It's hard to do that. And I have five children, so almost as many
Oh,
children
wow.
as books.
Question.
Um, yeah. So I would say two things. You could start with the first book, The 5 Day Turnaround. So the first book I wrote was meant for people who want to embody the entrepreneurial spirit a little more. So I wrote that book in 2018, 2019. And then my most recent book is called Dream Small. And I think that's a good motivator to figure out, how do you find work that is purpose driven for you and important to you. I will say the most fun thing about the books for me is that I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni's books.
Yeah.
He writes fables, and so they're stories. So I write my books as stories as well. So there are characters that are recurring, and I just find I learn better when I read someone else's story, whether it's fictional like Patrick Lencioni's books or biographies or autobiographies. So I've written all my books in that style, and so it's fun to revisit those characters. But yeah, either 5 Day Turnaround or Dream Small are good places to start.
Talked about Lencioni. You talked about Simon Sinek. Is there a person, whether it's writer or leader, that it particularly inspires you, and what lesson you learned from them?
Yeah. So my hero is Bobby Kennedy. So I've read so many books on Bobby Kennedy, and his the thing that inspires me the most about him is that he evolved as a person. That I'm not going to say he was like a bad guy at one point, but he was a very different person than the person that ran for president in 1968 before he was assassinated. And to see someone that didn't have to change, that had every advantage in the world, he's a Kennedy, he's wealthy, whatever, to completely pivot and change over time to saying, I have to, I mean, I don't know that he had a stated purpose statement, but it could have been to have an outsized positive impact. And what he stood for during his campaign and his run, and how different our world would have been had he been able to actually run
Yeah.
for president. So to me, he's someone that I have found a lot of inspiration in.
Yeah, that's interesting. You don't hear that much, but yeah, he certainly led an interesting short life.
Hmm.
And I wanted to clarify that you weren't referring to Robert Kennedy. I don't think that's going to make the cut here, but
No, yeah, the the original Bobby Kennedy. That's why I like to say Bobby Kennedy,
yeah, yeah.
not RFK. Yeah.
Moving along, but that just came to my mind. So,
Yes, sir.
the business is changing. You have AI coming. You have a lot of new companies, emerging. If you were thinking about, for the future business and what it would look like, kind of tying in your purpose-driven piece to it, kind of waving a magic wand, if you would, what would be the ideal kinds of things the company should be doing and thinking about?
Well, I'm a big believer that every business can and should be a force for good, whatever they're doing. Certainly, businesses going forward, leveraging AI and leaning into it and not being scared of it, I think is the way to go. Ultimately, if I had to boil it down, I just want more empathetic humans, and I really want empathetic leaders. I think leaders who care, and try to put themselves in their workers' shoes. I've had the benefit of working at high paying job companies, marketing technology. But my dad runs a vending company, and one of the businesses we bought with Purpose Group is a print company in Bowling Green, Kentucky. These are hourly workers working in the factory. Like, we try really hard to help them and meet them where they're at. And I just feel like the world would be such a better place if business was a force for good and we had empathetic leaders.
Yeah, that's great. I also like to ask a question about work-life balance. a lot of leaders I talk to, it's like, yeah, what is that? What does it mean to you? Now you have 5 kids, you've got several businesses, you're writing books. Uh,
Yeah.
so what does work-life balance mean to you? And you have the Z's and the millennials and the alphas are coming up, and do you see it meaning different things to the different age groups?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I think today's young person um, maybe expects more than their companies can provide in terms of work-life balance. So I think that's like for me, I've just been very fortunate to connect my work to things I love doing. So when I write books, I love writing about those topics. When I work with my companies, I'm like passionate. My wife, I remember early on in our marriage, Tino, on a Sunday night, I guess I was just going on and on about how excited I was to go to work Monday morning. And she finally said, that hurts my feelings a little bit when you say that because most people are excited to be home for the weekend with their wife or their family. And I was like, no, 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 I love that too.
Yeah,
There's just so much exciting stuff going on. So I think it's easier when you can connect, your purpose or your joy with the work you do.
yeah,
That becomes easier. But I prioritize my family, and I can't say I did that. Maybe the first 5, 7, or 8 years of us having kids, I worked really hard. I was usually home by 6 or 7, but I would leave at 4:30 or 5 to be able to be home
wow,
at 6 or 7.
yeah,
And I was there on the weekends, but was I there, or was I thinking about
yeah.
the business? So I think I've had to grow and realize what's most important to me. And so spending time with my family is number one. And I'll take my kids to things. If I have a talk somewhere or a business trip, I'll see if I can take one of them. So I just try to, I think of it less as balance and maybe like overlapping and trying to make everything work together. But ideally, the best answer is make sure that what you do is something you care about and have passion toward, and it won't really feel like work.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and very similar to my philosophy that when you say work-life balance, a lot of times it means, and people in other countries see us as Americans, we live to work um, versus work to live. But if you think of work as it's fun, it's something that's part of your life. It's not like you're separating work and life. So, yeah, I think we're aligned with that, and it's I don't know, maybe different generations feel different about that, but the risk is just separating those two. It's work and there's life, but it's not really like that. It's the blend, right? So
That's right. Yep.
yeah, no, you made a really good point. So you're doing a lot of different things, but you have something like it's what's next for you, things you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, what's next and what should be next for me for the next 20 years is adding more companies to Purpose Group. So we'll always be doing that. I would guess one a year at least. So I'm always looking for businesses that fit our criteria. I've always got a book project or two in the works. I've been wanting to write a nonprofit leadership book for quite some time. I've had the opportunity to be on many different boards of nonprofits and start my own. So I feel like I have something to say there. So yeah, it's either book projects or it's businesses for Purpose Group, or it's the next big family vacation. Those are sort of the three things I'm usually focused on.
Sounds good. Last question for you. So, because we want to leave the listeners with something, if we could leave them with one piece of advice regarding relevant leadership, what would it be?
Mm. I mean, it's again, I'm going back to the well, but it's find your personal purpose. Anytime I get a chance, I didn't get to do this at the TEDx talk because they're pretty strict, but anytime I get a chance to talk to a group of people, no matter what the topic, I always say, no matter what you do, find your purpose. I might be talking about some random digital marketing. Start with find your purpose as a person. I find so many people who are, 40, 35, 45 years old that, have been in, say, corporate America for so long and they're just unfulfilled. And it's such a
Yeah,
shame. So to me, it's find your purpose. There's lots of formulas for it, but I can't emphasize enough. Like my friends who have figured it out, like myself, life becomes so much more interesting.
yeah. Well, Jeff, thanks for joining me on Leading with Relevance. This is going to be great for our listeners to hear, and really appreciate you and everything you've done.
But I really appreciate you having me. This was a great conversation.
It
Really thoughtful questions. I enjoyed it.
was fun. Thanks, Jeff. All right, take care.